So my answer to the question, does Kavakos use Russian technique, would be yes, mostly. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name's Emily. I'm in the studio today to answer your frequently asked questions. So if you are new here, I welcome you, and I would encourage you to click on a video that I have linked in the description here to give you an overview of the difference between Franco-Belgian and Russian technique for violinists. So I am a professional violinist and I have had extensive training in both Franco-Belgian and Russian technique, and I eventually settled on Russian technique as my preference. Before we get into this video, if you're finding my content helpful and informative, I would really appreciate for you to subscribe to my channel. It shows in my analytics that most of my audience who is watching my content is not subscribed to my channel. So if you like this content and you would like to see more, go ahead and hit subscribe and hit like on this video. The commentary that I am giving with regard to Russian technique, or as I like to call it, golden era technique, because I feel that the Russian name is very confusing and it's not actually accurate. You can learn all about that in the orientation video that I am going to link in the description below. I'm going to answer your frequently asked questions from the vantage point of myself. So I am here to represent the quote-unquote Russian violin school or golden era bow technique from my perspective of someone who is using it, playing with it on a daily basis, and teaching it successfully. So my commentary is going to be very different than what you will get from most violinists who are commenting about technique online. Most violinists who are commenting about Russian technique are doing it from the vantage point of either criticizing it or just analyzing it, but not from the perspective of someone who is using it and actually knows how it works. So with that being said, that is the perspective I'm coming from to answer your frequently asked questions. The first question is one that I have received many times in the last several months, and the question is Leonidas Kavakos using Russian bow technique? So I am very excited to get into this today. I've had a wonderful time reviewing Kavakos Performances. It is amazing, just exquisite performance and very inspiring. So, and it's sad actually that we won't have time to make this video longer to watch all of the repertoire in its entirety, but I am just going to touch upon a few little intricacies and differences between the two techniques in an effort to help you pick out those differences and to analyze whether or not Kavakos is using Russian technique. But before we get into that, I would like to just show that there is a common misconception, okay, between the difference between Franco-Belgian and Russian, and we need to know this in order to evaluate whether Kavakos is using a Russian bow hold. So most violinists believe that the main difference between Russian technique and Franco-Belgian technique is merely the placement of the index finger. So with Russian technique, as you probably know, the placement of the index finger is much deeper over the stick. So it's going to be on this bottom segment of the index finger where I rest onto the bow. Whereas with Franco-Belgian technique, the placement of the index finger is going to be much higher. The fingers will also be more spread out. So it's true that is the most visible and possibly the main difference, but I would like to put to you that the placement of the index finger is not the only difference. It's merely a signifier of basically a completely different set of rules for playing the violin. I want to get into the very particular attributes of Russian technique and show you and demonstrate to you which ones are Russian based on my perspective of someone who uses Russian technique. And and which aspects I perceive to be more along the line of what we currently refer to as Franco-Belgian technique. So let's get into this. We're going to start with an older video. So a younger Kavakos, he's going to play Paganini Caprice, and we're going to look for attributes of Russian technique in his performance. So right away, we see that he has the placement of the index finger is mostly in this lower segment, okay? This lower segment of the index finger. So he's not letting it sit up on the stick. Also, we see that his wrist is very tall. This is another thing that we can easily use to detect Russian bow technique, because with the placement of the index finger deeper over the stick, the wrist is going to go higher. And that is for the purpose of allowing the natural arm weight to flow through. So we see that both aspects of Russian technique here, with his deeper placement of the index finger, and we see his taller wrist. In later videos, it's going to be easier for us to see. This video is not high quality because it's so old. But the next aspect that I want to point out to you is the pinky. If you look at the way he uses the pinky, in most of the footage that I saw, his pinky is very straight. And this is sort of a gray area, okay, between the two techniques, because critics of Russian technique will try to claim that all of the fingers are straight, okay, like this. So because the wrist is so tall and the fingers are not spread out like they would be in Franco-Belgian technique, the appearance is that these fingers are all straight, rigid, and locked. Okay, that is the appearance that comes across from someone who is not accustomed to playing with the index finger so deep over the stick. Okay, but this is not correct. Okay, it is not a correct use of Russian technique with the straight, rigid, and locked fingers, and it is not a correct perception of the technique. So if you might see students who are trying to play with Russian technique but unable to unlock and soften the fingers, it's not correct Russian technique. Okay, so this is a huge misconception. So like I said, many critics will think that this defines Russian technique, the straight and rigid locked fingers. My Russian technique that I use and that I teach to my students has soft, round fingers, soft, round thumb, okay? And my pinky is also round because my pinky is going to bear the weight of the bow while my bow is in the air. Anytime a student locks the pinky straight like this, it is going to also lock out the natural weight of the arm. It's going to lock out the natural weight from transferring through, okay? So we are going for a very round shape with the pinky in particular. That's what I'm looking at here. What I see from Kavakos is that his pinky it's not the same roundness that I prefer, but I don't believe that it's rigid, okay? So I think he is still using it to balance the weight of the bow. Even though it looks like it's straight, he may be using it to balance the weight of the bow, but also often he departs from the stick. Very often he departs from the stick. So he is definitely not locked with the pinky. This actually sort of warms my heart to see that even though the appearance of his pinky is straight and it looks rigid, like it could be locking the weight out of his arm, I can tell by the way it sounds, and I can tell by the way the rest of his bow arm is functioning, that there isn't rigidity here in his pinky. He is still using it to bear the weight of the bow. So I really like that. There's so much nuance to both violin schools, and the truth is, every violinist, we're all going to adapt our own technique to what functions the best for us. This is just one aspect where I can't say perfectly yes or perfectly no that Kavakos is using Russian technique, because that pinky position is not what I'm going to do, and it's not what I'm going to recommend for my students. He obviously can pull off anything, so even if I say I'm not going to recommend my students to play like this is not a criticism of Kavakos at all. This is just, I'm coming from my school of Russian violin technique, and I'm going to prefer the round pinky. He can pull off whatever he wants to do. I have no criticism for him. Okay, so we talked about the pinky, and now in this Paganini, he is going to play the variation where it's going to be brisk down bows at the frog. It's right here. What I want you to notice here is that he is using the entire bow arm to execute this stroke. I'm going to show it to you again in slow motion so that you can see the difference. In Russian technique, we are using the entire bow arm as one unit in order to successfully convey the natural weight of the arm without disruption to the sound. So in another video of my frequently asked questions, I'm going to show more of the difference between how the bow arm should function. One Franco-Belgian bow arm is going to function more as a pump, with the wrist and the elbow joints actually sort of pumping in and out more, whereas the Russian bow technique is going to be more of a swing, where the primary joint that I'm using for the bow changes and the string crossings is going to be the ball and socket joint of my shoulder. So here in this Paganini, what I want you to watch for is that even though he's staying right here at the frog, he is using the entire bow arm to accomplish this brisk down, down, repeated down stroke with the retakes. It's all coming from his shoulder. It's a beautiful thing to see. We're going to watch it in slow motion. So, if you look at it in terms of where is the motion coming from, his wrist is not changing, okay? His wrist, his fingers also are not changing. He's not using them as hinges. He's not using the wrist as hinges. He's not using the elbow. He's not opening and closing the elbow. It's all coming from the shoulder. Okay, in this next clip, I can't play very much of it just for copyright reasons. So, but it's the Bach E major. Yeah, Gavotte and Rondo. Okay, what I do want you to see is that, so this is several years later. I believe this performance is from 2018. And I want to show you that his pinky is more round and there's more curvature to the pinky than I have seen in any of the other performances that I watched. So unfortunately, the vantage point is kind of hard. But I'm going to pause the video so we can just look at the still image and see the round pinky shape. And I would argue that this is the aspect of Russian technique that I do encourage my students to use, because when the pinky is round like this, it is supporting the weight of the bow while the bow is in the air. So in this Gavotte and Rondo, he is doing a lot of spiccato, where he has to pick the bow up off the string and balance the weight of the bow in the air. We don't want to ever have to, grab onto it tightly when the bow is in the air. In order to get the bow off the string and into the air, we have to be able to just balance it with the counterweight from the pinky, and not any rigidity in the thumb or other fingers to feel like we have a secure grip on the bow. Okay, so here in this still shot, we can see that his pinky is round and he is using it to accomplish this beautiful spiccato where there isn't a tight grip on the bow, but he's balancing it. So that's a good thing to see. I really like that. Okay, we're going to fast forward even more. This, I believe, the Tchaikovsky Concerto is from 2021. Of course, I had to do Tchaikovsky. It's my favorite. I wish we could see the whole thing. So we have, again, the pinky that is a straight pinky, but it's resting on the stick. You can also see that he does have a little bit of reflexive motion from his other fingers. And this is a flexibility that is reacting to the bow change. As someone who is using Russian technique, the fluctuation in the shape and the reactivity from my fingers when I have a bow change, here for him it's very mild, and it's very subtle, okay? But the reactivity in the fingers is something that I do not do in Russian performance, okay? And what I don't want to teach my students. So when I have a bow change, I am not doing any reaction from the fingers. I am just going to change the bow straight from the shoulder. It doesn't mean that my fingers are locked. It just means that there isn't any disruption when I change the bow. Okay, another thing. Look at this still image. If you look at the thumb, okay, let's discuss the thumb. So right now we have a really clear shot of the thumb, which is pretty straight, okay? So his thumb is sort of it's gone a little bit concave. My thumb actually won't do that. Sometimes I have students whose thumbs will kind of bend backwards, like almost like double jointed, but you see how his thumb is bending back like this, whereas in Russian technique, in the one that I use, I am always trying to maintain more of a round shape from my thumb to make it round with the pinky. So I have more of it's like an enclosure or fingers that will cradle around the stick, and my thumb supports that cradle. But do you see how my thumb is curving the opposite direction from what we see right here? So I would argue that this aspect, his thumb is sort of pushing the bow out of the center of the hand. Again, this isn't a criticism. This is just my analysis of whether or not he's using Russian technique. So that his thumb is sort of pushing the bow out to the top part of his fingers. Okay? He still has the contact point here, deep on the index finger, but the thumb and the other fingers are sort of pushing the bow out. Whereas with Russian technique, my thumb is going to stay round, and I'm going to try to keep the bow, the frog, centered inside my bow hand. Okay, so that's a clear shot of the thumb, and I would say that thumb is not Russian. Okay, what he just did with his bow was interesting to me. Did you see what happened when he was playing on the G string? So in theory, he could have just stayed on the same G string level with his bow arm. Remember, I told you with Russian technique, even the string crossings are coming from the shoulder hinge, okay? The ball and socket joint of my shoulder is responsible for the string crossings, and it is responsible for the bow change. Okay, but what Kavakos did here is kind of fun, and I would say unique, and his way of expressing himself and the music is that he played the G string passage with variability on what side of the string he was on. Okay, so you've got the string in a cylinder, very small cylindrical shape. Okay, I kind of like to do this with pencils, so let's Let's do that. Okay, pretend this is my string. It's a cylinder, okay? Can't really see very well. But I could play on one side of the string, the side that's closer to D, or I could play on the other side, which I have a lot of room to play over here because I'm not going to hit another string. But all of the strings have some different surface area. There's some variability in the surface area that I could use. I could choose to play on one side of the string or the top of the string or the other side of the string. So in this passage in the Tchaikovsky, he came along and he said, I'm going to play G string, but I'm going to play around with what side of the G string I'm going to be on, even though I don't have to. I don't have to because I don't have to go to another string, but I'm going to play around with it a little bit. I thought that was fun and intriguing, and just a unique expression from Kavakos here. I like that. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to illustrate here, and it could be argued that this is not really a difference in the technical approach, but he uses more portato than is probably indicated in the music. Again, this is probably just his own way of interpreting the music. But generally, you know, if I'm working with students, I will try to encourage, if it's a legato line, so multiple notes under the slur, I'm not going to encourage them to articulate every note underneath the bow. I'm going to try to teach my students to maintain a very consistent weight from their arm and very consistent bow speed, so that the line doesn't get disrupted, that the line of the notes that is under the slur is going to sort of convey underneath the overall phrasing. So what Kavakos is doing here is sort of breaking up the notes that are underneath a longer legato slur as a way of emphasizing them and articulating them. So that's why I'm saying he's using more portato, generally speaking, in his playing than I would be accustomed to, or than I would encourage my students to. But again, that's, you know, it's his style and it's his choice to do that. Whether or not it's Russian, I don't know that I would claim that that has to do anything with the way he holds the bow. Look, his pinky just left the stick altogether. Okay, we are going into the second movement of the Tchaikovsky, because why not? It's just the most beautiful thing ever written. Again, you can see that little bit of reactivity in his fingers, which is more Franco-Belgian than it is Russian. I think there's more call for that portato stroke that I was telling you about earlier in this second movement. So, you know, it's nice that he uses that portato to give emphasis or to articulate underneath the slur. So let's talk about his wrist for a minute. I told you that the tall wrist is something that people use to detect whether or not someone is using Russian technique. And he does have that tall wrist so that the weight can flow through all the way to through the index finger onto the stick most of the time. But here's a big difference, okay? He is also very free with pushing the wrist down when he gets out to the tip. So when I am playing and what I'm teaching my students is that even when we play at the tip, we want the weight of the bow arm to be able to convey through the wrist. So we still have to make it at least feel tall. Anytime I crack the wrist like this, I'm going to lose the opportunity to convey the weight all the way through to the index finger. And but Kavakos is very free with pushing the wrist down when he gets to the tip. Okay, we're going to get into the third movement of the Tchaikovsky now. And what I want to show you for the most part is I'm going to identify his Sautillé and spiccato as distinctly Russian. So this is interesting actually. The vibrato, did you notice that? Okay, let's go back. He's got a little bit of so this has nothing to do with bow technique, but I want to point out his choice to switch from wrist vibrato to arm vibrato in this moment. Look, this is absolutely a wrist vibrato, and then in the next moment he pivots to an arm vibrato. So basically he's using every tool at his disposal to manifest the expression of the music that he wants to convey. So now I want to show you in this third movement of the Tchaikovsky how his Sautillé is distinctly Russian. So he's got a powerful upper arm motion helping him with these the up bow stab, the accents that he's taking off the string, the flying spiccato. But his Sautillé is also a result of the use of the shoulder hinge, okay? And this could be argued, and this could be seen as controversial between violin technicians who disagree about the way this technique is supposed to operate. But okay, let's watch that spiccato again. He's using the motor from the shoulder, and any reactivity that he's getting from the wrist and fingers is a result of the flexibility, and it's a reaction from what he's doing from the shoulder hinge. He's using the entire arm to create the sautillé, okay? And this is distinctly Russian because in Franco-Belgian technique, the sautillé is going to be more of an action from the wrist and fingers, okay? But because that arm motion is so minuscule, what it does is it goes along this trajectory and creates something that can encourage the spring in the bow to kind of manage itself, and it causes the bow to jump as a result of its own life, I think, if you will, because the bow has to serve as a spring in and of itself. I'm going to show you this later also in his beautiful saltando and ricochet, but he's, by not having a sort of a death grip on the bow, he's allowing it to have its own life, but that motion is coming from the shoulder. You can see that it's not originating. The motion is not originating from the wrist and fingers. And so this, I would argue, is distinctly Russian. So is he using Russian technique? Yes, in this case, when it comes to his sautillé and spiccato. This impacts the sound quality more than anything else, okay? I think this is really a beautiful thing. This is a beautiful bow arm. This is a really beautiful vantage point to see what does look like his Russian bow hold. The only way to do this is going to be by treating the bow as if it's a spring, as I told you before.